Hey, Rich Kimber, the Civil War Traveler here, and I'm in beautiful Lancaster, Ohio, on my way to Sharpsburg for the Maryland campaign tour, and I had the pleasure and privilege this morning of meeting with Laura Bullock, director of the Sherman House Museum. Laura, how are you today?
I'm just fine. How are you?
I'm doing great. Thank you for taking the time to talk with us today. It's been a fantastic tour you've given us of Sherman's boyhood home. Could you tell us a little bit about Sherman as a young man and a little something about the house to make folks interested in stopping by here?
Okay. Well, first of all, the house is amazing. When you come into this house, you experience 3 different time periods all in one house. The original section is 1811, then the second section is 1816, the third section is a Victorian time period in the 1870s. But you see Sherman's childhood home, then you see his Civil War experience, and then the last thing would be his retirement home.
Okay, so we get all real aspects of Sherman's public life, and as we walked through this morning and had our chance to talk with you, we learned a lot of great things about General Sherman. Can you share with us one of your favorite stories from General Sherman's boyhood?
Well, one of my favorite stories, there are several, but one of my favorite stories is that the other children teased him about his red hair, and he was very embarrassed. So he did an experiment to try to dye it, and his hair turned green. That meant he had to live with green hair until it finally grew out. And the story goes that that's what taught him that it's more important what's inside a person than the outside.
That's an outstanding story, and you know, I think at some level, I know some folks I grew up with can relate to that. They had a similar experience, so that was good. Sherman had his dad died early.
His dad died when he was 9 years old. There were 11 children in the family, and even though the Sherman family was a very influential family, they were not a wealthy family. So his mother could not afford to keep all 11 children. The older ones were sent to live with friends and family. The oldest boy was in college at the time. So anyway, General Sherman Kump was sent to live with Charles Sherman's best friend, Thomas Ewing. Thomas Ewing became a U.S. Senator and was able to get an appointment at West Point for Kump as he got older.
Excellent, excellent. So, and Senator Ewing just happened to live 2 houses up the street, correct?
Yeah, exactly. So they were very good friends. They rode the legal circuit around Ohio together. General Sherman's father was an Ohio Supreme Court judge, and Thomas Ewing was an attorney. So they held court in different places around the state together.
That's very interesting. So Sherman did not serve. He was in the military during the time of the Mexican War, but didn't get a chance to go to combat in Mexico. And he left the military to pursue some business interests and wound up. So you taught me as the superintendent of Louisiana State Seminary, which is the precursor to Louisiana State University, LSU Tigers.
Exactly.
How did that come about, and what was the story behind that?
Well, I'm going to go one step back before
Okay.
I answer that question. He did not fight in the Mexican War. However, he was stationed in California, and he is the one that sent the original letter to President Polk that gold had been discovered in California. So that was a pretty, fantastic time, even though he would have much preferred fighting in the Mexican War. And then to go on with your question, yes, he did leave the military. He tried banking and a little bit of legal work, and eventually became the superintendent of what is now Louisiana State University. He was looking for work. He could have been a banker again in New York City, but he'd already tried that and decided that wasn't really the profession for him. And they were just opening this school in Louisiana, and so he applied and several people that he had gone to West Point with were kind of involved in making the decision. And so he got the job. He liked it very much. He said had it not been for the Civil War, he would have been very happy to stay there.
So who of influence helped General Sherman land at LSU? You had mentioned Braxton Bragg.
Exactly.
The notable Confederate general. Who else?
And I'm sorry, I don't remember.
Okay, but I think it's very interesting to see the interaction of the folks who would be opposed to each other on the battlefield, that they were actually friends in real life and outside of the military.
Yeah, and that was very sad because most of the leading generals during the Civil War had gone to school together. Many, when the war broke out, many of them went south, and not quite as many stayed with the North. But they were fighting their West Point friends, and in General Sherman's case, he was fighting against the students that he had in Louisiana. So it was, in many ways, very heartbreaking.
There's a story of him paroling one of his former students, isn't there?
Exactly, yeah. He saw the boy headed off toward prison camp, and he didn't even have any shoes, no coat. And so General Sherman, he really couldn't get him out of prison. He could get him a shorter stay, but he made sure that he had shoes and a coat and provisions.
So that's very interesting. That's not the picture people often paint of General Sherman being a bit of a humanitarian. Where'd the concept of total war come from, and Sherman's campaign through the South?
Yeah, I think that was a combination, an agreement between General Grant and General Sherman. We have a marvelous book by Charles Flood that's called The Friendship That Won the War. And, according to him, he doesn't think there was any other relationship in all of U.S. military history that was quite as beneficial as the friendship between Grant and Sherman.
So, to quote Sherman, Grant stood by me when I was crazy, and I stood by him when he was drunk.
Absolutely, yeah.
So let's talk about post-war a little bit. You had mentioned that Sherman was not unpopular in the South following the Civil War. Could you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, he was respected in the South after the war. He was very much against Reconstruction, which is something the South did not want. And he also tried to promote the idea that Confederate veterans could have a place in veterans' homes. He was a great fan of the South. He loved the South. He said that was his favorite place to live. And he and his wife maintained a home in St. Louis for the biggest part of their married life.
Okay. So, and to kind of wrap up, when Sherman passed away in New York, even Confederate General Joe Johnston came, and unfortunately that's where General Johnston caught pneumonia, because he wanted to pay respects to General Sherman by not wearing his hat as a pallbearer.
Yeah.
I think he said something like, well, Sherman would have done the same for me.
Yeah.
That's the amount of mutual love and respect that these men had for each other. So let's bring things up to a little bit more contemporary times. Do you have any events that are we're going to be celebrating the 200th anniversary of Sherman's birth here in February of 2020, right?
Yeah.
So what do we have planned for that so far?
Well, we're hoping for just a huge birthday party. We, from February of last year through February of next year, we've had special activities every month. We've had great speakers. We have, but we try to have at least one event every month. We have a Civil War roundtable that meets the third Wednesday of every month. But for his birthday, we're hoping for music and birthday cake and lots of foods, and we also have some reenactors who will show Sherman and Grant in different situations. So we're hoping for just a fantastic time.
Great deal. Thank you so much for your time this morning, Laura.
Thank
It was
you.
fantastic. The tour was wonderful. Hey guys, if you're in or near Lancaster, Ohio, the Sherman House is worth your time, whether you have Confederate family ancestors, Union family ancestors interested in military history or just U.S. history. It's a great tour. These are some great folks, and they've done a fantastic job preserving Sherman's house. Rich Gimbert, the Civil War Traveler, and I'll see you down the trail.